I was just told that we may have to pause for just one moment. The feed to C-SPAN may be interrupted, and I'm waiting on a clear signal so that America can tune into our hearing today. So just stay right there and let me get the official word that we are good to go. Ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed good to go. How about that like that? So that's it. And so the 5-minute rule is begun under Committee Rule 9, and I'll begin. We'll recognize Ms. Igoroff for her opening statement. Welcome. We're glad to have you here. You're recognized. And speak right in there. Own that thing. Just put right into it.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm here to share my experience as a New York City public school parent, an immigrant, and a New Yorker who has seen the impact of the border crisis in our public schools and our city. I want to start with a quote from our mayor, Eric Adams. He said this in an interview 10 days ago. Quote, "I'm stuck with housing over 198,000 migrants and asylum seekers, over 38,000 children, all on taxpayers' dime. We spent over $4 billion per year, and we're still getting in a large number. Last week, we got in 1,100 migrants. We have been averaging 1,000 a week for the most part. That's over 4,000 migrants a month. That is a real strain on the city." Quote. It really is a real strain on our city. The New York City Independent Budget Office now estimates that this crisis will cost $12.5 billion over the next 3 years. To put in perspective, this represents approximately 5% of the total budget of New York City. The city has had to enact several spending cuts to deal with this. For example, Mayor Adams has canceled the training class of 250 incoming New York City school safety agents, which are desperately needed in our schools. He said then that parents would have to volunteer to keep our schools safe. Our public libraries are no longer open on Sundays because of this crisis. New York City has the country's most inefficient and inflexible public school system in the country. Our schools spend $39,000 per child and have a total budget of almost $40 billion in 2024. This crisis has had a devastating impact on our schools. For example, our principals continue to receive an influx of new students without any advance notice. Our children do not have access to enough ESL teachers. And this is not a problem that can be solved with money. The U.S. Education, the U.S. Department of Education has reported that 26 states now have a shortage of ESL teachers. I'm an elected parent of the Community Education Council for New York City School District 2 in Manhattan and have served as its vice president. In my district, parents have complained about bus delays caused by the constant influx of new students and express safety concerns. For example, when a migrant student who lived in a shelter in our district shot a tourist inside a store in Times Square earlier this year. When you consider this crisis, please consider 3 additional issues. 1, nothing is compared to the devastating impact that is actually being inflicted in migrant children themselves. Our south border is now considered by the UN the deadliest land route for migrants in history, as it's being recorded. No child should be in that border. No child should be crossing that border alone. But unfortunately, the number of children who have been crossing that border alone has skyrocketed in the last 4 years. We went from 40,000 children in 2020 to now approximately 150,000 children crossing the border alone. New York State is again taking the burden of all these children that are coming alone. 2 out of the top 8 counties with the highest number of children that cross the border alone released to sponsors are in New York State. The Department of Homeland Security has published multiple reports saying about the violence, sexual exploitation, trafficking, and abuse of children making this journey. They all end up in our schools, and we don't have the staff or the necessary infrastructure to deal with all the problems that this crisis is creating. Second, I want you to consider the type of migrants that are coming. My family has become a refugee last year from the war in Ukraine. These are not the same type of migrants who are coming, who are economic migrants. The majority of migrants by the UN are women and children. The majority of migrants that arrive in New York City are men of military age. And third, please follow the money. There is now a migrant complex that is receiving $4 billion from New York City taxpayers every single year. There are hundreds of emergency contracts that the mayor has given without following the process. The state is now investigating these contracts. This goes, for example, 6% of the hotel capacity in New York City now is being used to house migrants. There are contracts for health services and for security services. As the report by One City Rising, a nonprofit, has said, these are endless opportunities for grift in our city. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Igoroff, and well done coming in under the wire. Ms. Chamorro, you are recognized. Welcome to the committee. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Amalia Chamorro, and I'm the Education Policy Director at Unidos US, the nation's largest Hispanic civil rights and advocacy organization. We work in partnership with our affiliate network of nearly 300 community-based organizations across the United States and Puerto Rico. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective on today's topic of immigration in public schools. First, educating immigrant children is a smart economic investment. I am a product of this. I came to the US as an immigrant student from Peru at the age of 9. The support that I received from my colleagues, my community, my teachers, and peers when I arrived made all the difference. I was able to navigate a new school system and pursue higher education, both of which allowed me to become a contributing member of society. My personal story aside, it is our moral obligation, consistent with our American values, to want all children to succeed and have a bright future. It is also the nation's legal obligation, as affirmed by the Supreme Court's Plyler versus Doe decision more than 40 years ago. It is settled law that immigrant students cannot be denied a public K-12 education. Writing for the majority opinion, Justice William J. Brennan Jr. concluded that education provides the basic tools by which individuals might lead economically productive lives to the benefit of all of us. This continues to hold true today. As we continue to have these discussions, it is crucial that they be based on facts. Inaccurate and misleading narratives will only work to deepen divisions. Some will try to paint a negative picture of immigrant students. But let's be clear. Immigrant students are a significant asset in our schools. They are known for their resilience, grit, and problem-solving skills. These are all characteristics that are critical for 21st century learning, ensuring the nation's economic advantage. Research shows that their motivation to succeed contributes to positive classroom environments that benefit all students. The global knowledge and cultural and linguistic diversity they bring to our schools enrich our school communities. While the current border situation is unsustainable, and some districts have experienced enrollment increases, the claim that our schools are being overrun by immigrant students is not supported by data. In fact, most students in K-12 public schools are US-born citizens. The most recent census school enrollment data shows that only 3.1% of elementary school students and 2.2% of high school students are foreign-born. Moreover, many foreign-born students are here legally through various programs. These include special programs such as Uniting for Ukraine, the Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans CHNV programs, and the Children of Immigrant on Work visas. Regardless of birthplace or status, we must provide a quality education to all students. Many will become citizens and make invaluable contributions to our communities and the economy. Congress has the power of the purse and has the authority to make critical funding decisions. It is up to Congress to ensure that schools have the resources they need to support all students, including newcomers. It is up to Congress to address our chronically underfunded public education system. I think we can all agree that education has the power to transform lives. Denying any child the opportunity to learn runs counter to our moral and legal obligations. It also undermines our nation's ability to develop a competitive workforce. As Congress works to enact fair and enforceable immigration solutions, we cannot lose sight of our responsibility to educate all students. The challenges raised in today's hearings are symptoms of a broken immigration system. Until Congress provides a bipartisan, comprehensive solution to this issue, our schools will continue to experience these challenges. The responsibility lies with Congress, not our schools, to fix this. Thank you.
Mr. Chamorro, thank you very much. Ms. Rodriguez, you are recognized. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and honorable members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to speak with you today regarding the impact of the border crisis on public schools in Texas. At a time when our country, schools, children, families are still recovering from the educational and developmental losses resulting from the COVID lockdowns, the problem was compounded by an unprecedented influx of illegal border crossers being released across the country. Since FY21, according to HHS, more than 400,000 unaccompanied alien children, or UACs, have been released to sponsors throughout the U.S. Texas has received the most, with over 58,000 unaccompanied minors released into the state since 2021. In my county of Tarrant, we have absorbed over 2,600 unaccompanied minors. That is roughly the population of 4 elementary schools in my district, or the entire student population of the high school I graduated from. These unparalleled numbers in such a short period of time pose a significant burden to Texas, our schools, the students, and the taxpayers. Cost per student in Texas public schools vary depending upon the source, but estimates range from $10,000 to $18,000 in local and state funding per student, meaning that the cost for a single year of education based off just the number of UACs, not including the minors that have crossed in family units, released into Texas, is between $700 million and $1 billion. These costs are in addition to the over $11 billion and climbing of state taxpayer dollars Texas has been forced to spend taking unprecedented measures in response to the current administration's failures. Here is the sad reality. Nearly half of the existing student body across the U.S. is reportedly performing at below grade level. According to the Texas Constitution and federal law, public schools must educate all school-age children, including those who are illegally present in the country. As a result, taxpayers are questioning how school districts are expected to meet the educational and developmental needs of the already underserved American children population, in addition to the mass influx of migrant minors with complex and costly needs. The grim negative impact of the border crisis on public schools reaches far beyond the quality of education and financial strains. Many public schools and communities have become hotbeds of criminal activity, recruitment, exploitation, and death, caused at the hands of emboldened cartel-affiliated gangs preying on our youth. Due to the enormous amount of drugs pouring over our borders, Governor Abbott, the Texas legislature, and school districts have implemented measures to expand Narcan and other resources to combat the fentanyl and opioid crisis. Awareness efforts and placing Narcan in the hands of school administrators is clear evidence that we are sorely losing this battle against the opioid crisis and subsequently failing our country's youth. Narcan is a death preventative, not an opioid crisis preventative, and I encourage congressional members to consider this when appropriating future funds. This is not an issue that throwing money at the problem will solve. It is a national security issue which requires secure borders and enforcement of existing laws. Another concern is the unknown. As I have witnessed, many of the migrants and minors illegally crossing do not have documentation. There are limited ways to vet anyone illegally crossing, which are often ineffective. Considering that many of the unaccompanied minors, according to data, are allegedly older teen males, how many of them have criminal histories, affiliations with gangs, or are actually adults who are potentially infiltrating our communities and public schools? Additionally, schools along the Texas-Mexico border have endured extraordinary security issues resulting from bailouts and cartel-related activity. Several schools have implemented additional measures such as fences and boulders along the school grounds to stop vehicles, criminal smugglers, and those actively evading law enforcement from entering the property. It doesn't have to be this way. Current circumstances are a detriment to all students, teachers in our communities and our country. It is my opinion that when we cannot sufficiently meet the needs of American children's education, the U.S. has no justification for pretending that we can take care of the educational and developmental needs of the world's children crossing illegally over the border. If this administration truly cared about equity and inclusion of underserved communities in the U.S., they would secure the border, stop incentivizing lawlessness, and prioritize the overwhelming needs of American children in our communities. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today.
Mr. Rodriguez, well done. Thank you very much. Ms. Barkey, you are recognized. Welcome to the committee. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you. Dear Chair Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to address you today on this important matter. As a member of the Orange County Board of Education in Southern California and Director of California Local Elected Officials for the California Policy Center, an educational nonprofit, I have seen firsthand the impact of illegal immigration on our K-12 education system and the challenges that it poses to our schools, teachers, and most importantly, students and their families. Today, I'd like to share with you some of the issues that we see every day in California. I am speaking on behalf of the California Policy Center. I am a trustee, but I'm speaking for myself. Our educational systems in Orange County and California are undeniably strained, and the governor and legislature are preparing to cut billions of dollars from the state budget. Illegal immigration only intensifies how many parents feel about our school districts. Districts with high numbers of non-English speaking students often require additional resources to provide English as second language programs. While there is some additional funding for non-English speaking students, the additional funding does not adequately cover the associated costs. It is our citizen students who miss out on a high-quality public education as funds are shifted away from in-classroom learning. In addition, the extra funding received by districts with higher immigrant populations deprives other districts of funding for their most basic programs. Staffing within the districts becomes difficult with illegal immigration. There's a heightened need for more teacher training and professional development. Districts must often hire additional translators and paraprofessionals to help alleviate the pressure on teachers. There are also additional staffing costs to providing testing to get a baseline on students' English language performance, and more funding is necessary to periodically test these students to determine when they are ready to be reclassified. In California, there is also standardized testing to assess progress for English learners and migrant students. The 22-23 statewide proficiency scores reveal more than 75% of migrant students fail to meet English language standards, and more than 85% do not meet grade-level math standards. Obviously, this impacts the pace and manner in which teachers can teach material to their class as a whole. It is more difficult to maintain high educational standards when redirecting considerable resources to address the additional needs arising from illegal immigration. These programs demand a significant portion of our already constrained budgets, which make it difficult to assist every child in reaching their full potential. The need to divert resources towards specialized programs for undocumented students often results in fewer resources available for other students, such as students with special needs, gifted programs, and other extracurricular activities. Many Orange County district schools are experiencing an increase in population that significantly impacts staffing. We often hear about this when we have requests for interdistrict transfers on appeal at the Orange County Board of Education. We are especially reminded of this with basic aid district addresses our board. Our board colleagues and I believe that parents know what is best for their children. We almost always grant interdistrict transfers to the requesting family. Unfortunately, basic aid districts do not receive additional funding for the additional students, so any child that needs additional services can be very problematic for the district. Overcrowding complicates and destabilizes classroom management. A high student-to-teacher ratio can lead to safety issues when supervision suffers. Students who don't understand our language, customs, or societal norms can be disruptive to learning and create additional challenges for the teachers and other school support staff. When teachers and aides are focused on class interruptions, it takes away from the important instruction they are trying to provide. We often don't know the ages of students since a child may not have their birth certificate. Thus, we may be putting 7-year-olds in kindergarten classes or 20-year-olds in classes with 10th graders. Safety is especially important in states like California that have sanctuary policies which limit the cooperation of state and local law enforcement officers with federal immigration authorities. Since 2021, U.S. Customs has encountered 470,000 unaccompanied minors. In 2023, California had over 11,000 of those unaccompanied minors who must by law be enrolled in public schools by their sponsors. According to the California Department of Education, currently over half of our 944 school districts in California, 540 of them, are providing services to migrant students. The influx of unaccompanied youth, many of whom may have been abandoned or trafficked in our school systems, also creates additional challenges with mental health, housing stability, and school safety issues. In conclusion, it is critical that everyone understands the real-world impact of illegal immigration on our education systems and the need to secure the border. Our first priority must be the safety and education of our students, and no amount of funding can paper over these complex challenges that threaten to overwhelm our schools. Thank you so much for inviting me to share these observations with the committee today. I appreciate your time.
Ms. Sparky, thank you very much, and to all our panelists. Well done on launching our committee. As you know, or if you're tuning in, votes were just called on the House floor, so just a moment, we're going to call a recess, but not to worry. Members, your questions, as well as further discussion on the immigration crisis, the impact on K-12 schools across the nation, will continue. Pursuant to the previous order, the chair declares the subcommittee in recess, subject to the call of the chair for votes on the House floor. We will reconvene following the last vote of the series. The subcommittee stands in recess. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, the subcommittee will reconvene and come to order following recess. We are talking about the open border, the impact it's having on our K-12 schools across the nation. And under Committee Rule 9, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. Put the clock on me because I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Witnesses, once again, thank you for coming forward and your testimony. Ms. Egoroff, you're an American citizen. You immigrated from Brazil. How does it make you feel seeing all these folks just walk across the border? Tell us about your journey.
I grew up in Brazil, in Latin America, so I understand why people want to come here. It's a great country. I understand the desire, but I think most immigrants are appalled about what's happening, right?
You are. And they're saying this is not the way we did it.
I am appalled, and my family, we have had every type of visa that you can imagine as a student, and then going through the process. As I mentioned, my husband's family became refugees last year. They had to wait for many, many months for the process, even though they are both 85 years old and lost everything during the war in Ukraine. And so I really think we need to follow the process and
follow
the law.
the process. Do you feel like they're held to a different standard? Is there one standard in education for people who have crossed here illegally versus people who are not here illegally?
Absolutely. My husband's grandmother lost everything, had to cross Ukraine under fire of the Russian army, had to wait because she didn't have a passport, and we had to go through the entire process, go to the embassy multiple times in Vienna where she was waiting for the process. We follow the process, and again, people are just crossing the border. I
gotcha. No, I know it can be very frustrating. It's like people cutting in line. Nobody likes a skipper when we're in line somewhere. Ms. Rodriguez, you had talked about being a border state, but now we know every state is a border state. When we talked earlier this morning, we had talked about different standards, that migrant children, illegals, are held to a different standard than normal enrollees. Will you talk about that? Is that something?
Yeah, so I think one of the things to remember, I've spent a lot of time along the Texas-Mexico border, and I picked up documentation and IDs from both adults and young juveniles and children that were dumped as they crossed illegally into the country. And so then the children in particular, once they come in contact with a federal agency like HHS, they then create this documentation based off of unverifiable information, because at that point, these individuals, including the children, are who they say they are. There's no way to truly verify it. So then that information is then used to enroll the students into schools. But yet, as an American, even when I enrolled my children and even switching school districts, we had to jump through hoops to provide documentation of vaccination status, education, and things
Should we just take their word for it? In my own district, there was talk of a student who claimed to be 18 but looked 26 or 27. Does that happen a lot?
Well, and that's the thing, is that we really don't know until something happens, right, where then it is brought to the forefront. There's no way to truly verify it, and that should really be concerning for everyone.
Very good. No, thank you so much. We know California, Ms. Barkey, California is a border state, but now we know every state is a border state, and we had a great time talking this morning too. What could we do? What could California do, which also spends per student one of the highest in the nation of what it spends, but you have to question, does it get its money's worth? What could we do if we didn't have the illegal immigration problem in California?
I believe if we really strengthened our immigration policy that we could achieve more in California. We are at the bottom. We're in the bottom of almost every metric. And the resources that we put towards illegal immigrants, it is costing our children. It's costing every children. I have compassion for every child, and we're hurting all of them. So I would really like to see a stronger border policy so that all of our children could really succeed.
So it's tough, though, when someone doesn't speak the language. Are resources, or is there a separate class for somebody to have to even teach them English, but yet you still have to make sure our own kids get instructed? Is that correct?
Yes, it really takes from classroom time, because in the younger grades, everyone is together in a classroom. So when you have children that are significantly behind and the immigrant children are significantly behind in English language and math. 85% in math, and I believe 60 in English language, or I may have that confused, but basically they're considerably behind our own students, and it does drag down the entire classroom and takes resources from the whole class when you're having to manage an entire classroom with children at different levels, often language barriers and things like that the teacher must deal with.
Very good. True, false, Ms. Egeroff, true or false, in New York, you had to be fully vaccinated before you were able to come to school. Unless you were an illegal immigrant, then you could come. Is that true or false? Put your mic on. I think you said true. Is that
Yes,
that's true?
it is true. The mayor waived all vaccines for illegal migrants.
Thank you very much. Now, I now yield to the ranking member for 5 minutes for questions. Ranking Member Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. I wanted to express a concern that in many ways I don't want this hearing to be an attack on migrants in our communities. Hearings and words that are used can have consequences and put students in harm's way, which is especially concerning when research shows that migrant students often face disproportionate risk of bullying and harassment. There's no question that we have challenges at our U.S. border. We all acknowledge that. But we're talking about children here. And Ms. Aragov, you talked about following the process. I'm talking about fixing the process. The process is broken. We haven't had comprehensive, humane immigration reform for years. I've been here for a dozen years. Every year we talk about it, we don't do it. We came close in 2013. There was a bipartisan bill that passed the Senate. We weren't allowed to vote on it in the House. The system is broken. And I've spoken with people in my home state of Oregon who have escaped horrific, dangerous situations. So we need to fix the process. We need more judges to make decisions on asylum claims. We need to fix the process, for example, for our dreamers. But immigration policy is not in the jurisdiction of this committee. So instead of using this committee as a political weapon, we should spend our time examining what the support is in place for newcomer and migrant students and what policies we can have to support those students so they can succeed. Because as I said in my opening, the U.S. Supreme Court said that children who are undocumented have a right to public education. So I want to start by setting the record straight on the protections that we have in place for undocumented students. So Ms. Chamorro, you point out in your testimony that the Supreme Court has ruled that students cannot be denied a free public education because of their immigration status. So what is the significance of that precedent set by the Supreme Court in 1982 in the Plyler decision? And do these protections also exist in law, in statute, as well as a Supreme Court decision?
That's right. That landmark decision continues to be important to protect the rights of immigrant students to be able to access education just like all other students. That is established law. There's no question about that. And so, to paint the picture that confuses the narrative about whether or not students have that right because of their immigration status is misleading and inaccurate. And so we need to set the record straight that all immigrant students, whether they are documented or not.
And is it also in statute?
Yes, it is. And this is provided in my written testimony as well. But it is incorporated into federal statutory law through a provision expressly indicating that Congress would not interfere with Plyler rights as it sought to restrict other immigrants in the 1990s. And the citation for that is 8 U.S.C. Statute 1643A2. So that is, in fact, in statutory law.
Thank you so much. And one of the sources of support for migrant students is Title III, English Language Acquisition Programs. And I remind my colleagues that these programs were established in No Child Left Behind, which, as you all know, was a bipartisan bill signed into law by President George W. Bush. Unfortunately, the House Republicans' 2024 Labor, Health and Human Services and Education Funding Bill proposed eliminating federal support for Title III programs altogether. So, Ms. Chamorro, how would migrant students be affected by such a drastic cut? And how would defunding Title III affect students who are not English language learners?
Sure. So Title III is the federal funding program that is dedicated to support the instruction of English learners. And I will also note that most English learners are in fact U.S. citizens, so not all immigrant students
Correct.
are English learners and vice versa. It would have a devastating effect if that program was to be eliminated. It provides important supplementary support for schools that are Title I and that also receive Title II funds for teacher training and supports. So this is additional funding that schools may receive and that states get based on a formula that provides for 80% of that Title III funding is based on their state's EL population, and the other 20% is for their population of newcomer students. So it is a critical source of support for states.
So in other words, just to make sure I get your point right, if Title III funding were restricted or limited or cut altogether, it would make it even harder for schools to educate the children they're educating who are English language learners. Is that correct?
Correct. That federal funding stream is a lifeline for schools and states.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I'd like to request unanimous consent to enter into the record a written statement from the Center for Law and Social Policy, or CLASP, highlighting the need for this committee to reject xenophobic and sensationalized claims that newcomer students are harming U.S. schools and instead focus on securing resources our schools need to adequately serve all students.
Without objection, let's go to Utah, where Senator Burgess Owens is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. I think I'd like to start off by framing this in light of the border. This is not by accident. And we've seen an attack on our educational system. It has been on purpose. This type of incompetency cannot be on accident. The cost of illegal immigration is taking a substantial toll on our country and our educational system. In Utah alone, illegal immigrants is estimated to be adding 54,000 students to local school systems. This total estimate cost of illegal immigration amounts to over $900 million. Now, this is a state that's close to $1 billion of extra costs, a state that prides itself on a balanced budget. It is unacceptable, unjust to students, teachers, and citizens to pay this price for President Biden's strategy for power. If misery is the goal of President Biden, not only is he an all-pro, but he's a Hall of Famer. We're looking at misery of parents that have to try to figure out how to get the resources for their children to learn. Misery in particular for the at-risk communities like Black communities that's already been stripped of resources because of the Biden COVID shutdown. As a school system in Virginia, 60% of Black students have lost 2 years of learning, and this will make it impossible for them to catch up. It's not only also in misery for legal immigrant children. Of course, I'd like to mention that 85,000 of them have been lost by this administration. They're unable to assimilate. They're unable to speak the language, to understand what American culture is all about. They're stuck as wards of the government. Poverty is their future, and it's on purpose. They're vulnerable to crime and gang violence. They're vulnerable to sexual and physical abuse. And these guys just don't care. So as we go through this process, please remember, if this is on purpose, there's only one word I can call it. It's called evil. No one should ever do this to children, vulnerable for power. And that's what we have going on right now. Ms. Igaran, in your testimony, you highlighted the Department of Education shows that 26 states have a shortage of English student learning teachers. How severe is that process going on right now, and is the answer to spin our way out?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest problems is that there are 26 states now that have this shortage, as documented by the report by the Department of Education. And you know, this is not just teachers who speak Spanish, because there are children from every single country coming, and so it's just very hard to plan and then to be able to serve adequately.
Okay. It appears that the goal is, and as you mentioned in your testimony, that New York is lowering the bar of educational achievement following the learning loss of COVID. Is this a new American wave process now to figure out how dumb we can get our kids and call that success?
So what New York did, it's so appalling. And for me as a mother, I can't believe what they are asking me to do. Basically, they said that what third graders, for example, could do a few years ago, it's not what third graders now can do. So what they are telling me is that my 11-year-old, what he could do in third grade is not what I should expect for my lowest son, my youngest son. No parent will accept that. And what New York is doing is try to hide the learning loss from closing schools for so long, from masking mandates, from COVID vaccine mandates that prevented children and parents from going in our school buildings.
Okay, Ms. Rodriguez, you mentioned the public school system communities are becoming hotbeds of criminal activity, recruitment, exploitation, and death. We have experienced that in Utah. In Utah, this last February, we had an illegal alien raped an 11-year-old girl. Can you elaborate more on the failure of securing the border has created and the danger, the type of environment it's set up because of this policy?
Yes, so, and I think that that's one of the most egregious things, is that this isn't safe for the children, for the students, for the staff, for the communities in these schools and in the surrounding areas. We're failing. We're failing the future of our country. We're failing on every level.
And Ms. Mark, what are the in California? When you strain our system, what are the services and programs that are first to be cut from taxpayers' children when these resources are short?
Yes, it's always our most disadvantaged and our most vulnerable children that suffer the most. Those are the programs that go first. And we have a significant number of those children in California, about 800,000, and also a significant amount here in Orange County. So,
well, I'll just say this. Anyone in the Biden administration that has any touch at all in education should be fired. This is not something we should ever expect for our children to go through. These are the most vulnerable in our country, and they simply do not care. It's called evil. So thank you guys so much for that. I appreciate it. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. Let's go to the Northern Mariana Islands, where Representative Sablan, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wish DC was as close to the Northern Mariana Islands as we are here, because it takes me 30 hours to get here. So, but welcome to our witnesses. Good morning. Ms. Chamorro, I am a Chamorro. That's my ethnicity. We're people from the Northern Mariana Islands, and many from Guam are actually called Chamorros, whereas Austronesians, but yeah, nice to see someone named has my ethnicity. Nice to meet you. But also thank you for your testimony and for sharing with us how important it was, this topic holds for you as an immigrant student. I was once an immigrant student. When I was 11, I moved to the island of Chuuk in the Federated States of Micronesia to attend high school as the only Chamorro student in a campus of 150 students, Jesuit school. I had to learn how to adapt to new environments and find common ground with people from different cultures and backgrounds. And I did that by actually doing summers rather than going home. I immersed myself. I went to atolls and Chuuk that only see a ship every 3 months, 4 months. I spent a month there, and I went to explore other islands. I mean, just amazing. Those lessons served me well as a member of Congress. Before I even got my green card, before I became a citizen, I had the opportunity to work in the United States Senate for Senator Inouye. That has served me well to getting me to Congress, because it was then when I decided I wanted to be here. The lessons here involved I'm saying is that immigrants have much to contribute. They're not a cost to us. And I'm not sure why we're pinning this on, migrants at the border, for example, because Congress just passed the law, actually snuck in language into the Compact of Freely Associated States. I wasn't aware of it, and I was co-chair of a task force that looked over that bill, where non-citizens, non-migrants who live in the United States can go and attend any public school for free. And I'm talking about post-high school education, college. And there's no language in there on if the federal government is going to pay for that. So I guess the states end up with the bill. I'm not sure where the dysfunction is. We're doing one thing here and complaining about the same thing here. Can someone explain that to me? Anyone?
If
The
I'm,
disparity over the same thing, two different approaches?
if I may, you did mention about the contributions of immigrant communities, and I don't think that we have to imagine the contributions that newcomer students can make to our country, because we have seen that realized in our DACA recipients. June 15th, just a couple weeks from today, will mark the 12th anniversary of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival program. There are over 570 DACA recipients, and about 94% of them are employed. They also contribute about $13 billion to the national economy, combining federal, state, and local taxes. So they are, in fact, also taxpayers that are contributing to the funding sources. I would also add that they have become professionals in high-need sectors, including in the teaching profession, because we have about 15,000 DACA recipients who are currently classroom teachers. And so they are also giving back. Not only have they benefited from having access to education, but they are also educating today's students and helping to develop tomorrow's workforce.
But
So we
you-
have seen that
Yeah,
realized.
no, I'm not, the real message out there, if you really look for it, it's just that I get confused. For example, right, some members are gonna argue that there's an increase in the budget for a certain agency after they increased it from the president's submission, but cut it to even less than last year's existing budget. You know what I'm saying? You see the math there? Thank you, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Illinois, where Representative Miller is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bean. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Bark, you talk in your testimony about the added budgetary strain foreign national students have caused our schools. You mentioned the need to hire more translators and ESL instructors. How many new translators have been hired in your district?
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I can't give you a number, but I know that we're constantly having to hire, depending on the district and the influx of migrants in that particular district or school. But unfortunately, I can't share exact numbers with you.
Are you doubling, tripling?
I would say we are probably at least doubling and tripling.
Okay, and even at that, you're at a shortage of translators?
Yes, it's not always so easy to hire in Orange County, in California, the cost of living and other issues, and the difficulties that come with being an ESL teacher, they're not easy to find. So between the shortage of finding them in states like California and the cost of living to bring somebody into the community to teach is very challenging at a lot of our districts.
What does each additional translator cost taxpayers?
I don't know that number either. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay, how many translators are needed for languages beyond English and Spanish right now?
We do have, immigrants coming from other countries as well. So we need to, if we have more than 15% within a district, we have to hire. And so we do have districts with people from China, people from Ukraine, people from other countries that, yes, Russia, that we are having to hire translators as well.
So our concern is for our citizen students, and I'm just wondering how this works in the classroom if you have, say, a Spanish interpreter, Portuguese, and Chinese, and the teacher, say, is teaching a grammar lesson, and she addresses the class in the front and says, a noun is a person, place, or thing, then do the translators then, are they in front then saying it one at a time?
It depends on the classroom. Unfortunately, we don't have the funding for one-on-one. So in some cases, that's the case. Also, a lot of our students have translators right on their desks. So that's another expense that we do, is we put translators on the desk or actually translating for them during the lesson.
But would you say it's slowing education down?
It's absolutely slowing it down. When you have to accommodate so many different languages, it's absolutely slowing it down for all of our children. And the most vulnerable, our special needs children that need programs, they're really losing.
Yes, thank you. And this problem was caused by Joe Biden. He has allowed tens of thousands of unaccompanied minors to flood over our borders, and our children are paying the consequences. The American people are tired of picking up the tab for Joe Biden's failed policies. The American people and the schools and the children cannot handle this anymore. Thank you, and I yield back to Chairman Bean.
Thank you very much, Representative Miller. California is next, where Representative DeSaulnier is recognized. You recognize 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following on the previous question, comments, representing a district in Northern California in the Bay Area, and having spent a lot of time being very good friends with the last two superintendents of public instruction, Mr. Thurman and Mr. Torlakson. The problem with funding in California precedes Joe Biden being president of the United States and our initiative system. For special needs, that's actually a big problem right here in the United States Congress, where Congress promised to pay, I think it was 20% for special needs, and in California it's like 2% what we get from the federal government. So this precedes Joe Biden, our funding in California, does it not?
Yes, we've always had funding issues in California.
Right.
They're just exacerbated by the current situation. But yes, we have more money than most students throughout the nation, but our results don't
Right.
show it. We're at the bottom for literacy. We're 49th right now.
We don't have to go through the initiative system, but we can start with Prop 13 that then created Prop 98. You get a headache listening to financing in California. But English as second language is a challenge. We've done lots of studies. Peter Schrag, who you may know of, a great researcher on education and immigration, makes for 20 years, profound arguments in his last 2 books that California, as the 5th largest economy in the world, immigration in the Pacific Rim in this time has worked much better than 100 years ago when the Know Nothing Party was doing the same kind of hearings here in assimilation. So just in that context. And in similar context, if my colleagues really wanted to work on bipartisan effort, they could have. In 2013, a bill was called the Gang of Eight, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans in the Senate. Mr. Rubio, John McCain were co-authors of that. It was an extensive bipartisan effort to fix the problems with immigration in this country. It came over to the House, and Steve Bannon and the Freedom Caucus went to the then Speaker, Speaker Boehner, and said, "We don't want this on the floor. We're not going to vote for this." So a bill that passed out of the Senate with, I think, 68 votes, bipartisan, that came over here was killed over here. Pete Aguilar, our current caucus chair, and Will Hurd, a Republican who represented the largest part of the border, had a really good bipartisan bill that similarly died because the Republican majority did not want to address the real challenges at the border. Both of those bills preceded President Biden. So in that context, working together on the challenges of immigration, the president's about to announce something that I don't completely agree with, but this is a real challenge requiring grown-ups in Congress with very divergent opinions to work together, and particularly for future generations. So it's a little bit frustrating, and maybe you can hear that in my tone of the question here. But Mr. Chamorro, just let's talk a little bit about the benefits that states like California get if we did have immigration reform. I go out to my schools in my district regularly. I was at 3 last week. I mean, when you stand there as a white male and look at the diversity and look at the testing scores and the accomplishment in an area that fuels our technology industry, my area, the 680 corridor outside of San Francisco, all the benefits they have given. We need more engineers, civil engineers, we need more STEM. A lot of those are actually going through the system and are provided by immigrants. Can we speak a little bit about the challenges of getting people in this country and getting corrections so that the country can benefit from immigration as it always has done historically when it's done right, rather than trying to divide people?
That's right. As I mentioned in my testimony, we have the potential and the opportunity to invest in our immigrant students. I actually grew up in California when I immigrated from Peru, so I went through the English as a second language classroom. I became proficient in English, and my parents also became bilingual teachers. So it's something that I have lived through. And now to be able to sit here in front of you and not only share my story, but also speak to the fact that it can work if done right. If we invest in our immigrant students, if we see through their potential, they have characteristics that contribute to the positive learning environments. They are the future workforce of this nation. And if we say that the alternative is to not educate them or to give them an unequal education, that doesn't really get us anywhere. For California to continue to stay at the forefront of a global economy, we need to make sure that all of our students, including newcomer students, receive a quality education.
I'll just conclude with one of the things I've heard over and over again is that people who are here on visas and are raising their family, we need to fix that as well, because it's not just tech, but it's data people. And in biotech and in healthcare, if we lose those folks who want to stay here and provide as citizens, it's going to be a real challenge for our healthcare industry and any industry that needs good engineers in the data field. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. Let's go to North Carolina, where the chair of the Education and Workforce Committee is recognized. Dr. Fox, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Igoroff, you mentioned that New York City now spends approximately $4 billion in the city as a whole because of illegal immigration and asylum seekers. Can you put in context what a massive number that is?
Yes. So this represents now approximately 5% of the budget of New York City. And in terms of school, New York City is now spending $39,000 per student, which is the highest in the nation, I believe. And so these are the numbers that are being spent.
You also mentioned briefly that Mayor Adams canceled professional development for school safety agents, then said that parents would have to volunteer to keep schools safe. That sounds absolutely bizarre. Can you say more about that?
I think that's right word. It's bizarre. I have served as the community council for 3 years. This is the number one concern that parents have is about bullying and violence in our schools. There are schools that have multiple entrances, so they need multiple school safety agents to be in each entrance, and they don't have enough school safety agents. And unfortunately, this class, the latest class was canceled, and our schools won't have enough school safety agents.
Thank you very much. Ms. Rodriguez, you mentioned earlier that more than 400,000 unaccompanied alien children have been released to sponsors throughout the United States during the Biden administration. Why are so many minors coming to the U.S. without their parents?
Because our federal government is incentivizing it with our policies.
Thank you very much. Ms. Barkey, in your testimony, you mentioned that there's a considerable need for finding more ESL teachers due to the illegal immigration crisis. In Orange County or California more broadly, how hard is it to find enough ESL teachers to meet student needs?
Thank you for your question. It is very difficult. There's a shortage of teachers, as well as they don't always want to come to California or Orange County because of the cost of living. So there's the challenges of housing in Orange County and throughout California, and there's a shortage of teachers with the skill sets that are needed to be an ESL teacher, with the additional challenges in the classroom from children that don't only not speak the language, but they're from different societal norms, and so the classrooms aren't always as easy to instruct as you might think. There's not just the language barrier. There's not always support at home. We know that parental involvement is so important for academic excellence, and so the many factors that are contributing to the classroom disruptions make it difficult for us to find adequate numbers of ESL teachers.
Well, it would not be hard to imagine that for states where a lot of illegal children are coming in that are not California or Texas, where there are a lot of bilingual speakers, imagine the problem that states, and all states are border states now, we know that because we have illegal aliens coming into all of them, and I'm very sorry for all of these children who are coming unaccompanied, but imagine for the states where these children are coming in and the states want to provide a good education for them, and they can't find bilingual teachers. The Midwest, the South, I mean, I'm from North Carolina, and it's already hard enough to find any teachers, let alone teachers who can speak other languages in addition to English. And we know that people are coming in from 160 different countries. So it is not just Spanish and English that we need, but it's lots of different languages. So this is just a real problem. And these children are truly victims who are coming here unaccompanied, being put in the homes of people maybe they don't know, and then not being able to get the education they need. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let's go to the great state of Connecticut, where Representative Hayes is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I first want to start out by saying that I came to Congress as a teacher. I taught at a public high school for 15 years. Children are not aliens, illegal or otherwise, under any circumstances. And while I recognize that border security is a top priority of the American people, my Democratic colleagues and I realize that something needs to be done on this issue. So much so, in fact, that Senate Democrats brought 2 border security bills negotiated in good faith with Republicans to the Senate floor, and both have failed. So we need to address this problem. My challenge is that even though I realize this is an important issue, immigration is not within the jurisdiction of this committee, so I question the intention of this hearing. Under current U.S. law, all children in the United States have the right to a public education. That's the law. In June of 1982, which was not during the Biden administration, you can check that, the Supreme Court issued a ruling in Plyler versus Doe, a 5-4 decision holding that states cannot constitutionally deny students a free public education based on their immigration status. That was the Supreme Court in 1982. So the premise of this hearing is fundamentally misguided because undocumented children have the right to a public education in the United States of America. As a teacher, I never asked my students what their immigration status was because it didn't matter. What mattered is that students have access to things like textbooks, computers, school resources, school lunches, all of the things that are necessary to close learning gaps. A recent study of the Annenberg Institute at Brown University found that there's an estimated 55,000 vacant full-time teaching positions in the United States. Approximately 1,200 of those vacant positions are in Connecticut during the 22-23 school year. According to Teacher Shortage Area Database at the U.S. Department of Education, 33 states and the District of Columbia reported statewide ESL teacher or specialist consultation shortages, specialists or consultant shortages in the 21-22 school year. So there is a shortage. We know that. We also know that the current presumptive Republican nominee for president has said that he would eliminate the Department of Education. So are we truly trying to address this problem? What you are describing from the panel today is not the totality of the immigrant experience. I've worked in a school. I've been in an ESL classroom. Students are not slowing down the process. Translators are not impeding learning. That is what our country is about. We hear so often people on this committee quote our founding fathers. What you may not know is that John Adams proposed that English be made the official language of this country at the Continental Congress, and it was deemed both undemocratic and a threat to our individual liberties because we are a country of immigrants with people from all over the world. So this was the fabric of our nation and our founding fathers. And children have the right to an education, and schools, we make accommodations as schools, as teachers, you know, the IDEA, investing in things like that. But the last thing that I want to address before I turn it over and ask the one question that I'm going to ask, the last thing I want to address is that this idea that immigrant students are a hindrance on public education, I would challenge you to look across the country at your valedictorians, your salutatorians, your top 10 in any high school class, and you're going to find a first-generation immigrant. You're going to find students who, as soon as they overcame the language barrier, showed that their lack of English proficiency was not a measure of intelligence. So in a country that accepts immigrant children, houses immigrant children, has migrant children waiting for their status to be reviewed, what do you propose we do with these children? Not educate them? Any of you, please.
I don't think that anyone's stating that or refuting the fact that it is mandated by federal law to educate, but I think that it is an acknowledgement. There has to be an acknowledgement, particularly in the minority communities like my own, Hispanic communities and Black communities that are impacted the most.
I worked in a Title I public school district for 15 years, so I know exactly who you're talking about.
Right, so I think that that's important to recognize as well. We talk about the need for, I think the word is investing in the students and migrant children. What about investing in American children? That should be a priority.
It's not one or the other, is what I would encourage you to allow yourself to begin to understand. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the great state of Texas, where Representative Moran is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Bean. Since coming to Congress, it's no secret that the border security has been one of my top priorities. As the only member of the Texas delegation, either Republican or Democrat, that sits on the Education Workforce Committee, this is a great intersection of issues that I know very intimately. Earlier this year, my resolution condemning the administration's open border policies passed the House, called upon the president to end those policies, and in fact got bipartisan support. Not just Republicans recognized it, but Democrats as well recognized that the president's current policies for open borders are hurting America top to bottom, and we see it in the education institutions in Texas and other ways. Public schools are operating on constrained budgets, and now with thousands of migrant children showing up at our southern border, these schools are carrying even a larger burden. Schools and students are trying to catch up from massive education loss, as all of you know, from long-term school closures during COVID, and now the federal government is yet again adding more obstacles to their education. It's unacceptable. Students don't deserve this. Parents don't deserve this. Teachers don't deserve this. It's well past time for the administration to do its job to close our border and to restore order to our communities. I want to go start with you, Ms. Camaro. I thought I heard you say earlier, did you say $13 billion in funding is contributed annually to the U.S. economy by illegal immigrants? Is that the number I heard you say?
Not illegal, these are DACA recipients who have the
Did I get the number right? 13 billion, is that right?
That's right.
Do you know what the cost is to the open border crisis that we're dealing with right now?
I do not.
Well, I'll tell you, the House Budget Committee estimates that the total net cost to the United States from the border crisis, quote, is more than $150 billion a year, with the lion's share of that going to educate children who are here illegally themselves or whose parents are here without authorization, end quote. That's from the House Budget Committee. That's a deficit of $137 billion per year. Who do you think is picking up that $137 billion tax, that price tag?
So DACA recipients are just one set of taxpayers. We also have taxpayers like myself who want to make sure children are educated, and I'm more than happy to pay my taxes for that effort.
And most of the tax dollars that are coming to support our educational institutions are coming from local communities. All of you guys know that. No matter which state you're in, they typically come from local communities. Ms. Rodriguez, you mentioned that Texas has received the most unaccompanied minors, more than 58,000 since 2021. That number is staggering to me. Can you talk about the impact on those districts that are seeing the influx of those numbers, in particular the impact on the taxpayers as well?
Yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate your comment of recognizing the fact that it is mostly state and local funding that funds the public schools. I mentioned in my testimony that over 2,600 unaccompanied minors have been released into my county alone of Tarrant County in North Texas. That's a population of 4 elementary schools. That's roughly the population of Trinity High School that I graduated from, the entire student body population. Meanwhile, in my area, my next door neighbor, who was an elderly widow woman, had to move out of her home because she could no longer afford the property taxes. So even though our state legislature has made moves to try to make property taxes decrease, it's a drop in the bucket and pales in comparison to the cost of especially the schools and the hospital systems that local property taxes have to pay for.
Ms. Egorov, I want to come back to you because you were talking about New York City schools a little bit earlier, and I presume that what you're seeing in New York City is the same across America and same with what we see in Texas, and that is we'd love to pay our teachers more. We'd like to hire more teachers. We'd like to provide higher quality education to our students. A lot of that's made on the local and the state level. Can we keep doing that if we're spreading our resources thinner and thinner for undocumented migrants or illegal immigrants that are coming across the border?
The challenge in New York City, it's not funding. We're spending more than $39,000 per student. New York City is the highest spending district in the country. So we have a lot of resources. But the problem is that stability in the system. When you have a principal who doesn't know how many students are coming next week, who doesn't know which language they speak, who doesn't know how many years these children have not been in school because they were crossing the border, and God forbid what they have seen at the border. We know that the statistics, 70% of women and girls suffer sexual violence when they're crossing the border. This is ending up in our classrooms. The teachers are on the front line having to deal with the trauma, the violence. And if you're a boy, maybe you saw your mother suffering sexual violence.
It's a travesty. I want to see education for every student in this world, every child in this world. Education gets them advancement. But the truth is, America does not hold the responsibility to educate the world. We do not, and we cannot. The taxpayers that are spending U.S. dollars cannot educate every person in this world. Every country needs to take that on for themselves. We need to close our borders. We need to focus on our kids here to give them a fighting chance. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. Let's go to the great Commonwealth of Virginia, the ranking member of Education and Workforce, Representative Scott. You're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we have to remind people that complaining about the problem doesn't solve the problem, and we don't have jurisdiction over immigration policy. We've had an opportunity to solve the immigration policy. There's been a Senate bill that the Republicans have defeated. They've had opportunities in the past. Just complaining about it doesn't do anything. Ms. Chamorro, what resources do jurisdictions need to properly fulfill their responsibilities under the final decision?
Well, the federal funding sources that provide for all schools to be able to support all of their students, including newcomers. We have talked about the importance of Title III, which is dedicated funding for English learners, again, most of whom are U.S. citizens. And those are supplementary, right? Those are additional supports to schools that may be low income that receive Title I funding, and Title II to provide for professional development support for teachers.
Let me ask the others if they support increases in Title I and Title III funding.
New York City spends $39,000 per children. We don't need more resources. We need stability in our system and more school choice. We're number one in funding, but we're middle of the pack in learning outcomes for our children, and we have very low school choice. People are moving out of New York City because they want to be able to choose which school is going to educate their children.
I couldn't quite tell whether that was a yes or no. Do you support increasing funding on?
No, we already spent $39,000 per children. We don't need more resources.
You don't need any more resources on Title I or Title III. Ms. Rodriguez?
I'm never going to advocate for more spending when it's not going to actually solve the problem itself.
So you don't support additional funding for Title I or Title III?
I do not believe it is an issue of additional funding. I believe it's an issue of resources being spread.
Do you have a comment?
I agree. I don't believe it's additional funding. We have good funding in Orange County as well.
That's consistent with the Republican budget that doesn't increase Title I or Title III to actually deal with the problem. Ms. Chamorro, what could jurisdictions be doing if they had more Title I or Title III funding?
They could be doing so much more. I mean, we have all talked about students, not just newcomer students, but all students not meeting academic standards and the long-term recovery that it's going to take to bring students back on track post-pandemic. That requires sustained investment. We need those Title I funds, those Title II funds, and those Title III funds to make sure that we are providing for comprehensive supports for students to, one, get the academic enrichment and instruction that they need to be competitive, and also so that they have the supports that they need to be able to learn, including after-school tutoring and summer school instruction. And so it is very important that not only do we have the resources, but that we actually target those resources where they are needed the most, to those high-need schools and students that need that support.
What would happen to students if the final decision were overturned?
If Plyler were to be overturned, that would be disastrous. One, as I have already mentioned, this is in statutory law. So Plyler rights are protected in statute. And so to say that it's up for debate whether that decision can be overruled, that's misleading.
Let me ask you, what would happen if we did not educate undocumented students?
That's a missed opportunity for all of us. Not only do we have the responsibility to educate all students, including immigrant students, we're not taking advantage of the assets that they bring to the learning environments. They are contributing members of society, and if we invest in them, they can become our future workforce and sustain the competitive nature of the United States.
Isn't it, it's also true that if they're here and if they're not educated, they will cause problems in other places like the criminal justice system?
Those generalizations and that kind of rhetoric is so dangerous because it paints a broad brush on who these immigrant students are. Yes, there may be isolated incidents, but that is not to say that all or most immigrant students are dangerous. We have talked about, some members of the committee have talked about the trauma that some of these children experience in their journeys to this country. That kind of rhetoric only fuels and adds to that trauma that they're already experiencing and limits their ability to have a sense of belonging in their new home country.
But there is a strong correlation between those who are well-educated and reducing the crime rate. I mean, that's fairly well known, and if you don't take that opportunity, you're just asking for trouble later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Scott. The great state of New York is next. Representative Williams, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to focus my questions on you, Mrs. Igorov, if I may. First of all, thank you for your support for school choice. School choice is very important in my district, as are charter schools, especially for low-income families. And there's been terrific success with some charter schools in my district. I just want to set the migrant crisis aside for a moment and think about New York City schools. Sort of what's the base case that we're dealing with? Would you say that New York City schools are succeeding in their mission to educate our children as measured by, attendance, scores, in-school, in-class behavior, teacher retention, anti-Semitism, other issues that seem to be flowing through New York City schools? Do you say that they're succeeding?
I think the most important measure is children can learn to read. And now, besides the highest spending in the country, 2/3 of New York City children cannot read at grade level. This is very personal to me because my own son had spent his entire preschool experience being masked. Even when Madison Square Garden was full of people partying for public concerts, I could go to the gym, to the restaurant. My 4-year-old had to wear a mask every day at his preschool because of the policies of our city. And he really struggled to learn to read. And we are very blessed. We were able to hire him a tutor. But the vast majority of New York City families cannot access a tutor. And so we expect to see these numbers going up. But the Board of Regents in New York changed the standards, and so now we are not even going to have data about what is the drop in performance on our children's learning.
When you look across all of New York City public schools, and I appreciate learning at grade level is one of the things I was going to ask about. What are some of the other challenges that you think are systemic for the children? What are the children experiencing? Again, this is absent the immigrant crisis, just the state of New York City schools. I've heard food insecurity mentioned and some other things. What are some things that roil through the student population there that we should be concerned about?
I think the number one is crime and violence. There has been a lot of increase in crime in New York City, which is somehow related with the migrant crisis. And as I mentioned, this is spilling over in our schools, so we don't have enough school safety agents, and so there has been a lot of problems of incidents in our schools. Definitely anti-Semitism is an issue now that is happening. I get every week, I get pictures from parents about what has been put in the bathrooms doors of their children's schools. It's really horrific to see what's happening. Very, very vile comments about the Jewish community. And
may I ask if you would send those to my office? I would very much, to the extent that you can, with the privacy rules.
Absolutely.
And I mean, honestly, you're describing a school system that is in crisis and that has some major challenges to address the student population that there. I've lived in the city several times. Do you know offhand what resources, what's the cost to New York City School District for the influx of illegal immigrant children in the last, particularly in the last 3 years? Do you have an estimate of that?
I don't have the number, but it's 30. So Mayor Adams 10 days ago said 38,000 children, and the New York City Independent Budget Office now says that we're spending $39,000 per child per year. So 38,000 times 39,000. I don't know how much that is.
All the compassion in the world is not going to solve the crisis of New York City schools, much less with the additional 38,000 children of illegal immigrants there. I have no doubt that it's actually traumatic. I've been to the border. I've seen families crossing. We know the stories of the treatment of the cartels, and the incredibly difficult journey that immigrants make just to be and find themselves in New York City and the trauma that the children have experienced. But that's on top of a school system that's not functioning. Just in my last few seconds, what additional impact does the addition of these 38,000 have on the school district that's already in crisis?
I think it's masking the drop in enrollment in New York City. If you take out 38,000 children in the last 2 years, you would see a big drop in enrollment. Everybody who has the resources or the chance who get a seat in a charter school is leaving. People are leaving the city. People are transferred to private schools if they have the resources. So it's really masking the drop in enrollment.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the great state of California, where the chair of the Subcommittee of Higher Ed is recognized. Representative Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mrs. Barkey, you are an elected school board member in a county of several million people in Southern California, and I'm glad that you're here because, the border crisis that we are seeing in this country is particularly pronounced in California, where the state has taken the failed border policies of this administration and made things a lot worse with policies like a statewide sanctuary state policy and becoming the first state in the country to offer free health care to everyone who's in the state illegally. And the consequences of this have been predictable, where now the San Diego sector has the most illegal crossings of any sector in the country for the first time since the 1990s. And so this is having a whole host of consequences for our state, and in particular for our education system. And it comes at a time, by the way, when the state has, through fiscal mismanagement, wound up with a $73 billion deficit that is likely to lead to cuts when it comes to education funding. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit how that has posed challenges for you in running the many schools in your district, and in particular for the teachers, because teaching is a really challenging job. I was a teacher for some time, and when you have a lot of new people coming into the system like this, I have to imagine that poses challenges.
Thank you for your questions. Yes, it is very challenging for our teachers. Our teachers have what we call teachers unions, but we know those unions aren't really protecting our best teachers. We love our teachers. We have a lot of compassion for our teachers. We have some of the best teachers in the country. But the unions, unfortunately, are not protecting the teachers or the children. We saw that during the pandemic. And it is very challenging for our teachers to deal with everything that is going on in our schools. The lack of school choice, is a big problem for us as well. Since I joined the Board of Education, we've gone in Orange County from 14 to 43 charter schools, but we still don't have nearly enough to accommodate, and many parents can't afford private schools. Our private schools in Southern California, and throughout California, are very expensive. So it is a big crisis for teachers because they're really not protected by the unions, who are really not protecting the new teachers. They're on both sides of the bargaining table. A lot of union members are board members, and so you have them negotiating on both sides, and it's really not having favorable results for our children.
It is so important that we support our teachers. Matter of fact, last week I recognized on the floor of the House a number of outstanding teachers in my district, and so I really appreciate that perspective. Another issue I wanted to ask you about is parental involvement, because any teacher will tell you how vitally important it is to have strong parental involvement to the child's academic success. And so especially when we're looking at a situation when we have so many, tragic number of unaccompanied minors coming across the border, how has this posed challenges for your school leaders and teachers when it comes to facilitating parental involvement?
It's very challenging. We do know that parental involvement really, really helps with academic achievement, academic excellence. And when you have unaccompanied minors that may not have parents that are comfortable coming to the school for one reason or another, in many cases, the unaccompanied minors, their parents may not speak the language. They also may have fears of immigration status with a lot of our illegal immigrants, and so the parents don't want to get involved because it's scary to them to come to an open house or back to school night. And with a language barrier, it's difficult for them to help with homework. And we do see when there's parent involvement, that's where children really succeed. And so our immigrant population really is at a disadvantage, and it's also challenging for the teachers to manage a classroom without a lot of parental involvement. When you look at the best schools that are winning the awards, they're the schools that have high parent involvement.
Thank you very much for your leadership. I yield the remainder of my time to the chair.
Thank you very much, Representative Kiley. Let's go to the great state of Pennsylvania. Representative Thompson, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, Chairman, thank you very much. Thanks to all the witnesses for your testimony today. As we have already heard today, the crisis at the border has far-reaching impacts that include our nation's schools. This includes an impact on our teachers, who are forced to deal with rapidly changing classroom dynamics and increasingly class ratios, and potentially leading to even more burnout. Most, if not all of us, are very concerned about the teacher shortage across the country and what that means for our kids. In my home state of Pennsylvania, for example, the Penn State Center for Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis found that nearly 10,000 teachers left their jobs during the 2022-2023 school year. This comes as Pennsylvania also sees steep declines in new teacher certifications. Ms. Barkey, in your testimony, you said that illegal immigration can make staffing difficult within school districts. When we talk about illegal immigration in schools, a lot of times we talk about how unfair it is to students who are here legally and for good reason. But it's also tremendously unfair to the teachers who are here legally. Can you share some difficulties districts in Orange County have had in fully staffing their schools as a result of the recent influx of immigrants? For example, have you had difficulties finding enough English as a second language teachers for the influx of students?
Yes, we absolutely have had trouble finding them. And I noted earlier that partially Orange County, California, the high cost of living, it's difficult to get some teachers. We also just have a shortage of teachers in general, and teachers with the special qualities that an English second language teacher would have is challenging to find. They're having to deal with classrooms that are much more difficult to manage than in the past. With the influx of immigration and the lack of border policy, the classes are much more unpredictable, they're more overcrowded, and when you have an overcrowded classroom and you have more student to teacher ratio, it's much more difficult to manage the classrooms. They also have, as we discussed, we've got some humanitarian crises. So you have some children with other concerns and health issues that may be sitting in a class that are here not because they wanted to be here, and maybe they're been trafficked or other issues. So you have a classroom full of students that come from different backgrounds and have different things going on in their lives, and it's just much more difficult for teachers to manage a classroom than it has been in the past.
As a recovering school board member, I know it always was important that we respond, when we had students where English was a second language, but we were able to do that in measured ways based on the frequency and the volumes. And now with this massive open border and people coming from illegal into this country for, more than 150 different countries. So multiply that times the number of languages. Some countries with multiple dialects, multiple languages, it just shows you the foolishness of the open border process. Have you heard from teachers who are concerned about overcrowding in their classrooms as a result of the influx limiting their ability to spend time with each individual student?
Absolutely. And I have a real passion for children. I care about all of them. And when you have so much going on in a classroom and it's diverting teacher resources, even if they have an aide or paraprofessional in there, they're still diverting their resources to bring other kids up to speed and dealing with minor crises in the classroom. And the whole class is really suffering. Our own children are suffering in a classroom when so much is going on, especially when there's overcrowding.
Do you think taking proper steps to secure the border and stop illegal immigration would benefit both students and teachers throughout the country? If so, how?
Absolutely. I think a strong border policy would be so helpful. It would give us much more predictability in our classes, and it would just really make teachers feel more comfortable knowing what they're coming to every day, how many students they're going to have, what languages are in the classroom. I think a tough border policy is really necessary to make sure that all of our children succeed academically. And here in California, we're not succeeding academically. We're at the bottom. We're 49th in literacy. Our numbers are not good.
Certainly seems like it would be a better policy for any administration to focus on improving pathways for legal immigration, which provides us the opportunity to plan and deploy resources to be able to accommodate that. This open border doesn't do that. This is completely counterintuitive to what the nation needs, and quite frankly, what families that are seeking opportunity that want to come into our country need. So clearly, we don't need to exacerbate the teacher shortage in this country any further, which just is another reason why it's critical that the Biden administration use the tools at its disposal to properly secure the border. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. Let's go to the great state of Michigan, where Representative Wahlberg is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for being here. This is an important subject for education. This isn't, as some of my colleagues have said, a subject that is not for us. It's absolutely for us. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and Ms. Chamorro, I appreciate the compassion that you exhibit. I believe it's honest, and I believe it's truly based upon your concerns. The problem I have with it, though, it doesn't, and again I say from my Democrat colleagues as well, it doesn't meet with reality. It doesn't meet with the problem we're experiencing. It's one thing to say that our framers and founders wanted us to not have a national language. I disagree with them, but they didn't know what was going to happen. They expected people to come here as immigrants, as my family came, but to abide by the rules, to be legal, and to use terms like newcomers, even undocumented, evades the reality. And I think it adds to the problem, especially of unaccompanied minors who are coming across the border and being put in a situation that they shouldn't have to be put into. and it's not our fault. And so I think we ought to be talking about this. Ms. Rodriguez, your testimony stated that the 58,000 unaccompanied minors released across Texas under the Biden administration cost over $1 billion for a single year of public school education. That's significant dollars. To illegal individuals, regardless of their age. What should the Biden administration be doing differently to keep Texas safe and protect school districts from exorbitant costs?
Secure the border, reinstate Trump policies, stop incentivizing the exploitation of women and children. There's a number of common sense things that we could be doing to stop
And
this.
compassionate things, too.
Correct, actually, yes. We talk about the trafficking and the exploitation and the issues that so many of these kids, like the young girl who wore this bracelet from Belize, encountered on her way here to the United States. None of this exploitation would be happening if we did not incentivize it. It's that simple.
None of the rape trees would be there, would they?
Correct.
Simple stuff. Ms. Rodriguez and Mrs. Igoroff, let me ask you these questions. Ms. Rodriguez, in your testimony, you mentioned that unvetted, unaccompanied minors could have cartel and gang ties. Are you aware of cases in Texas where that's actually happened? And I would ask the same for New York.
Well, unfortunately, our government doesn't track that. So for children, for unaccompanied minors. So they will track gang affiliations, and you can see CBP stats for adults with known gang affiliations. However, when it comes to children, that is not a stat that is kept. So we often don't know about gang affiliations of unaccompanied minors or even the true age of unaccompanied minors until, unfortunately, after something happens.
Until it happens. What about New York?
I don't have that information about gang affiliation. I don't believe so.
Ms. Rodriguez, your testimony mentioned the potential that unaccompanied minors may be pushing and selling drugs in the public schools they enroll in. We've got enough of that going on already. How much vetting can occur before school districts are required to enroll these students?
None.
None.
So by the time that an unaccompanied minor or anyone at that point comes in to enroll in a school district that they cannot turn away, right, by law to enroll, all of the vetting has to be done on the front end by HHS or by CBP, and unfortunately, there's just because of the policies, they rush them through, so there's no way for school districts to do any of the vetting.
It's not happening.
Correct.
Especially when we also have the gotaways.
And false documentation that's presented, and yeah, there's a lot of problems.
The increase in fentanyl that's come to my district is an evidence of this going on, and that impacts schools, that impacts education, that impacts teachers. And sadly, it takes lives on both sides of the scale. I have been to the border numerous times to see the crisis firsthand. I've seen it as a crisis. I've seen it as it was cleaned up under the Trump administration. And I've seen what's taken place since this administration came in. I've seen the victims of abuse and sexual violence along the way. They are coming because of this president and his politics, and even compassion that's misguided and puts people at risk, especially kids. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Let's go back to the great Commonwealth of Virginia, where the chair of the Subcommittee on Help is standing by. Representative Good, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. I think you're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here. You know, it's the real question for our country, for our government, is who among the world's population, the 7 billion that don't live in the United States, has the inherent right to come to the United States, whether legally or illegally. And the Democrat Party, the Biden administration, and the Democrats in the House and the Senate, they believe that everyone who doesn't live in the United States has the right to come here, whether legally or illegally. And when you ask them the question, how much is too much, or when is it too much, or what's the limit? Because what percentage of the 7 billion people who don't live in the United States would come here if they could? What percentage would? The Democrats never answer that question, but they do believe that rather than us as Americans, the American government, the American citizen, the American taxpayer, having the right to choose who comes to our country legally, lawfully, earning their citizenship, pledging their allegiance to our country, trying to make us better as 1 million approximately legal immigrants do a year in the most generous country in the history of the world to immigrants from all over the world. Rather than believing that we should have the right to choose, the Democrats and Joe Biden believe that it is their right to come, irrespective of how they come, irrespective of who makes billions of dollars off of it, irrespective of the conditions they suffer on their journey to the United States illegally. That is the real question. And this is just one aspect of the question. Since Biden took office, more than 500,000 illegal alien children have come to the U.S. that we know of, they acknowledge. Ms. Rodriguez, my questions are for you for this. I know you've been to the border many times. I've been there 6 times myself. How have these children been used as tools or pawns to facilitate the illegal invasion of adults? Or what have you learned about their experience that these children are suffering as they come on their journey to and across the U.S. border?
We can spend several hours just talking about this in particular, and I really appreciate your question. And for me, it is personal because I've spent over 30 trips over the last several years, and I've witnessed these children coming over. And how does a 10-year-old girl from Honduras or Guatemala end up on the banks of Roma or La Jolla, Texas? And you have to listen to their stories about being shoved into bodegas. And when you ask yourself, why is this happening? And then on the flip side, released to sponsors that under this administration, if you look at the statistics of how many of these unaccompanied minors are then being released to sponsors who are not their parents, level 2 and level 3 are over 50 and 60% or higher in Texas. It's astounding and it's disturbing. Why? It's the policies. It's the policies that are incentivizing this because they're used as a meal ticket to come to the United States and to get and to be eligible for additional resources that they otherwise would not be eligible for if they didn't have a minor living in the household. Who is this benefiting? It's not benefiting the migrant children. It's not benefiting them, and it's not benefiting our communities, and it's not benefiting American children. This is a disaster for our country.
There's no humane or compassionate component to these policies, are there?
Absolutely not. I've seen the face of this trauma. I've seen it in grown adult women who every single time when I've asked them, would you take this journey again? What is it that's incentivizing you to come? And they're like, we're being told, now's the time to come. Come on in and you're going to get into the United States. And then when I ask them, would you do it again? Every single time, resoundingly, absolutely not. Tell them not to come. Because they had an idea that it was going to be dangerous, but they didn't know like this. And at what cost? To then be released into our communities? And what does their future look like when we can't even speak their own language? I've met people from Uzbekistan, from Tajikistan, from Georgia, from China, from all over the banks, all over the world on the banks of the Texas border. How are we going to meet their needs when we can't even meet the needs of our own American communities here? It's crazy.
What have you learned, and I know we're running short on time, but what have you learned about how the children are coming with, as you mentioned, those who are not their parents, or even the same children are used as pawns and tools to go back and forth across the border with different individuals to bring them into the United States? They acknowledge they've lost, 85,000 they admit, so you know it's far more than that, but just speak to that with the time we have it.
Well, I think what's even more astonishing is the fact that instead of de-incentivizing the children for coming, under this administration, the federal agencies has actually made permanent or codified dangerous, relaxed policies and made them even more relaxed. So this is a drop in the bucket of what is coming now that these changes have been made.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your testimony. Appreciate all of you being here today. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, representatives. We're nearing the end. Members' question having concluded, we'll go with opening or closing statements. Let's go to Ranking Member. You're recognized for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You know, we're the subcommittee on early childhood, elementary, and secondary education, and the very first sentence in the description of our jurisdiction says education from early learning through the high school level, including but not limited to elementary and secondary education, special education, homeless education, and migrant education. I trust that language means nurturing and strengthening and improving early childhood and K-12 education, not denying it. Now, this is in Ms. Chamaro's testimony, but I just want to emphasize that the vast majority of students in the United States are U.S.-born citizens, and according to the latest school enrollment data, only 0.3 of kindergarten students, 3.1 of elementary school students, and 2.2% of high school students are foreign-born, and that means foreign-born, not necessarily undocumented. I'll also note that unaccompanied minors who come over with refugee programs are supported by and educated by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, not our public school system. So I just wanted to clarify that for the record. So sadly today we're witnessing attacks on the plight of migrant children for some illusory threat that they allegedly pose to our schools rather than working together to foster safe and inclusive learning environments. Again, it is not the fault of the young children that Congress has woefully failed to pass comprehensive immigration reform. We know executive orders have been tried and overturned. It is the job of Congress to pass immigration reform. The children should not suffer because of the lack of action by Congress. And if anyone suggests that anyone on either side of the aisle supports child trafficking, that's absolutely not the case. For all my colleagues who are concerned with issues at the southern border, I ask that we examine the majority's newly reported fiscal year 25 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill, which would cut the agency responsible for processing immigration requests, USCIS, by 60%. The same bill would eliminate Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, funding for border management activities and funding to provide emergency shelter and services for migrants. So I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will join me in opposing this legislation, which would hurt our management at the border. I also want to note for the record that dispute the notion that an increase in immigrants increases crime. The Brennan Center for Justice research does not support the view that immigrants commit more crimes or are incarcerated at higher rates than native-born Americans. In fact, the opposite is true. So the law is clear. Education is a fundamental right for all children in the United States, regardless of their immigration status. Congress has a responsibility to protect and support all students by fully funding federal education programs, which means less burden for the states when we provide that support. And addressing gun violence in schools, which is something I hear about on a regular basis that this committee has not addressed, and stopping the rampant misdirection of taxpayer dollars to unaccountable voucher programs. We must build up our public education system, not spend our time undermining the rights of vulnerable students. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member. To our members, panelists, we've had a great conversation, and quite simply, it's been shocking what we've talked about today, the toll of illegal immigration on our school systems. We've heard teachers teaching in a hallway. We've heard of schools closing to house illegal immigrants. We've heard of resources being diverted to illegal immigrants, and we've also heard the safety of students and teachers being compromised. Bottom line, it's wreaking havoc on our school systems across America. It's hard enough teaching schools, teaching is hard enough, but without the unknown factor of just massive numbers coming in, it's almost an impossible task. I grew up one of 9 kids. I have 8 brothers and sisters. My parents were both teachers. I heard this my whole life growing up. Life is unfair. My mom couldn't cut a pizza in 9 slices, or somebody always got more pancakes than I was the baby, so somebody always got more pancakes than I did. But she would always say, life is unfair. And that's what this situation is to Americans across the board. It's unfair. Illegal immigration is unfair to teachers. Teachers should be able to focus on classroom instructions, not wondering how tight their classrooms are, or will their school be closed, or will I be teaching in the hallway? Will I even be safe? Who are these folks in front of me? That's just a struggle we shouldn't put on teachers. Illegal immigration is unfair to the students who are here legally. Their families pay the taxes to support these schools in the first place, and they should have access to these resources. Those who work hard and play by the rules shouldn't be penalized. It's unfair. Illegal immigration is unfair to the migrant children themselves. They're being used as pawns. We've heard today that they're trafficked. they're exploited just to get people across the border and then they're dumped. It's unfair. And I hope maybe somebody at the White House is tuned in today. Maybe they're watching on that C-SPAN feed that we fixed early so that they could see that there's havoc being wreaked upon by the policies of having an open border. So we've got work to do. I look forward to working with my colleagues on all sides of the aisle to come up with a plan that puts focus on where it needs to be. So with that, to our all-star panel, you lived up to expectations. I bragged about you that we were going to have an elevated conversation, and that's exactly what you gave us. Thank you for staying involved in the conversation as we go forward. We've got lots of work to do. There being no further business to come before us, without objection, the subcommittee is now adjourned.